Hey, a warm Heroes Behind the Badge welcome to Louis Quijas. He is a member of the Citizens Behind the Badge Law Enforcement Advisory Council. Louis, welcome to our podcast. Good to have you as a guest.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
You're a frequent op ed contributor to Citizens Behind the Badge, and I know you've had some very, very good opinions expressed. And I know my colleagues, Craig Floyd and Billy Erfurth, want to talk to you about that. So why don't we get right into it? Craig, I know you know Louis a long time, and why don't you start us off?
Well, I just think everybody needs to know that our guest, Louis Quijas, is quite the law enforcement professional, 36 years having served in law enforcement at the state, local, and federal levels. So there aren't too many law enforcement leaders in this country that can say that. And he brings quite a interesting and a very important perspective to what's going on in the world today in law enforcement. But Louis, I want to start with last, well, I guess it was right before the election, maybe in October of last year. You wrote an op-ed on our behalf for Citizens Behind the Badge, and you basically said that the number one issue facing the American electorate in November was public safety. That was the issue that really you felt was the most important. And I'm just interested, having now here we are, 8 months out from that election. Do you still feel that way? And have we progressed in a positive direction as a result of that election?
Yeah, no, I still believe that with all my heart. I still think the public safety piece of it is probably the most important. And even the general election for the president and now these midterms that are coming up, even at the local level, we've seen now how important these local elections are when they're electing local DAs and the local sheriffs and the appointment of chiefs. So I think it's more important than ever. And what I hope, and I know what we're trying to do for Citizens Behind the Badge, is educate people how important it is for them to get involved and be educated on, what is going on in their communities as it relates to public safety. So no, I still believe wholeheartedly. I don't see any let up, if you will, in that priority. Where that I think public safety should always be a front burner issue for us.
So Louis,
One of the, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
so Louis, let's just jump right into this. This op-ed, and it's a very interesting thing. And it was interesting for me because I had never heard of this before, never heard anybody talk about how this went on within law enforcement or in police work. But so you were involved in this. You talked about this in your op-ed. This St. Louis, Kansas City, Missouri, and how those police agencies are regulated by the state rather than on the local level. Never heard of that before. Pretty interesting. And I would imagine a lot of people haven't heard about it. So let us know about that.
Well, in Kansas City's case, it was around 1930 because of the corruption and everything that was going on in Kansas City. They basically fired almost everybody, and put the police department under state control. The governor, whoever the governor is, appoints 4 people from the community. Most of the time, one's north of the city, south, east, and west. So you have a diverse group. And the mayor only plays an ex officio member, is only an ex officio member of the board. Got 1 vote. So the mayor, like in most cities, can get rid of the fire or the police chief. That's not the case in Kansas City, nor was it in St. Louis. St. Louis was pulled out and they wanted to go on their own, go back under city control. And as you can see, how that's turned out over the last, I guess, about 10 years or so. They just recently, I believe in March, came back under state control because it's so bad in St. Louis. But one of the things I tell people, 9 times out of 10, I couldn't even tell you who the city manager was in Kansas City because we never felt that pressure from City Hall. We knew we had a board of police commissioners, very diverse. All of them brought different agendas, sometimes competing agendas, which made it interesting. Board meetings pretty interesting. But at the end of the day, just because a group of people would come down to police headquarters, demand that the chief be fired, which they did in right after the George Floyd incident and the rioting and the protesting. The chief at that time in Kansas City, they wanted to get rid of him, and it didn't happen because of the structure. And what you see around the country today with such poor political leadership, Chicago, Seattle, New York, LA, I mean, you could go on and on. Uh, and a lot of those chiefs, and Craig and I, and many of you know some of these, they're very good chiefs. And some of the stuff I see them doing, you think they normally would not do that. That's not them. And it's because they come under that city control. Where I think if they were under state control, it would be different.
So the goal of that ultimately is to take the local politics out and have a more neutral state oversight over the police department itself. Now, was it just the police department, or was it the fire department, or
No,
just police only, right?
just police, just law enforcement. And
And
what it does, it gives you some consistency in policy and focus and priorities rather than every 4 years, And when I was there, we didn't have unions. So we didn't get into all of that. Our focus was on public safety.
because
And that's what was so
we see this time after time where police chiefs are fired left, right, and sideways because they're not listening to the city manager or the mayor or the council or whatever, or they're not of the same political persuasion as the new person that just locally got elected there.
yeah,
And in contrary to the sheriffs, where if you're an elected sheriff, you're the man. You
yeah,
make the choices. You can't be fired. You might not be reelected, but way different
yeah.
situation.
Yeah, yeah. In the sheriffs, uh, they carry a lot of political power locally. I mean, they're out there. It's still a contact sport. You go out, you're shaking hands, you're kissing babies, you're doing, and nobody does it better than the sheriffs. A good sheriff's always out there. And I tell you what, after I started interacting more with them, through my work with the FBI, let me tell you what, I newfound respect for that group of people. And now there's a big push to bring those sheriffs under local control. I don't know if you've seen that, like up in Washington State, and I think it's King County, actually, up in right outside of Seattle, there, or part of Seattle. They're trying to bring that sheriff's office under city control because they do have power, and they can say, "Hey, this isn't right. This doesn't make sense. We are going to cooperate with ICE. We are going to help enforce immigration laws," and that's kind of been the rub.
Would
Yeah,
you
and
see this as a partisan issue at all? I mean, in Missouri, you have a Republican governor, and I think there was probably charges of partisanship that was responsible for the state wanting to take over St. Louis, even though I think the facts tell you that St. Louis wasn't doing a very good job of running their city and preventing crime. One of the things you made a great point in your op-ed, I thought, was that businesses and citizens were leaving St. Louis in droves because of the public safety issue. They just didn't feel safe there. And
Yeah,
as a result, they left the city. And so, the Republican governor looks at that and he says, and the legislature, of course, they had to approve this. They said, wait a minute, we can do a better job if the state controls the St. Louis Police Department. And obviously, you made the point Kansas City has been under state control for so long. But I'm interested in why maybe other departments within Missouri haven't been under state control. And do you view this as a Republican versus Democrat issue?
I do now more than ever. Back when I was a cop, again, we couldn't be involved in political activities. You couldn't write a check. I mean, we had guys that would get terminated if they got caught, donating to some politician's campaign. So we were very distant from the political any kind of political movement. So yeah, but I see it now that way. Look at say I go back to St. Louis. They've got rid of the DA. State came in and got rid of her. They're trying to get rid of the sheriff now, the St. Louis County Sheriff. Yeah, I mean, because of all just the crime. They're like what I believe right now they're number one or number two most violent cities in the country. and they're so disorganized. It's a lot of chaos. And, not that Kansas City by any chance is a shining star. They've got their issues, but we never had the issues that St. Louis had after they went back under city control. And I ran internal affairs for Kansas City for a number of years. I mean, we had our share of stuff, but we had no bit of anywhere stretch of corruption and some of the things that you see some of these major cities have. And I think a lot of it was due because we were under state control. We weren't under that city. The mayor didn't call over, the city manager didn't call over. Never worried about those kind of issues. So yeah, I believe that there is that piece now where it's a Democrat and Republican, and you've got a very progressive mayor in Kansas City right now whose public safety is not a priority for him.
That's good policy, isn't it? Yes. I'm interested in your amazing career. You started in Kansas City, right? In Kansas City PD.
Actually, 53 years and 10 days ago, I showed up at the police academy.
53 years and 10 days ago to the day.
To the day. Yeah, I'd probably on my lunch break right about now, wondering what in the hell have I done with myself? But yeah, we just had an anniversary, 53 years and 10 days ago.
And you were promoted as high as major, I believe, in Kansas City. Right? You left as a major, and then you became a police chief, right?
Yep.
In High Point, North Carolina. That had to be a little cultural shift from Kansas City over to High Point.
I tell you, it was the best move I ever made. It really was. Great town.
But the point, there's one move that you made after High Point where you became the first assistant director of the FBI who had not come up through the system. Obviously, you had come up through local law enforcement. Tell us about your promotion to that position, how it happened, and most important, what you did, because I think it's very critical. It's very similar to what you were just talking about, relationships with some of the local and state people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was really kind of very simple. I went from Kansas City to St. Louis, and we had been one of the first agencies that got into the community policing piece years ago. When I first came on, they were already talking about 53 years ago and 10 days, they were talking about community policing, because I remember having it in the academy. So when we went there, High Point was having some of the same issues that the big cities were having, but obviously on a smaller scale. Sure. And we just started implementing, the High Point initiative, which is still there today after all these years after I've been gone, and was picked up by a number of police departments around the country. We had more police departments visiting High Point because Janet Reno took an interest in it. She had heard about us. I wasn't getting any. And I always joke with people. I said, I never took any federal money. It wasn't because I didn't want it, but I wasn't smart enough to handle it. So I thought, I'm not going to get myself in trouble and get $1 million grant to do, because they were offering us money. And I'm trying to think of the lady's name. I'll think of her, Lori Robinson. Greg, remember Lori Robinson?
Sure, yeah.
And she was with DOJ at the time, and she took an interest in what we were doing. So to make a long story short, I got invited, myself and the U.S. attorney got invited out to Arizona to kind of share with the other U.S. attorneys there how we were working together to address violent crime, bringing all these federal resources in, developing these partnerships, but also having the initiative driven by our local citizens. And in that crowd happened to be a guy named Bob Mueller, who was a U.S. attorney in San Francisco. So now you go up, you speed it up a little bit. He's 7 days into his job as the new FBI director, and 9/11 happens. And Director Mueller, being the smart guy he is, realized that at that time there was about 13,000 gun-toting agents scattered over 700 locations around the world. He knew they weren't going to be able to be the prevention piece of that strategy to keep our country safe. Going to be those 800,000 cops out there 24/7 in the back alleys, out on the street, having the contacts that was going to prevent the next terrorist attack. And he realized that there wasn't that positive connection between the FBI and state and local law enforcement. It worked at the local level. A lot of great SACs out there that were, making good contact, had great relationships, but they rotated out, and then it would all start over again.
And Louis, that was you were the first guy doing that. and now you're with the FBI. So tell us, what was your greatest achievement, you think, when you were there, and how did you liaise on that?
What it was fairly, I want to say easy, because I had great partners like Floyd, Craig. We had people that knew what was going on, knew that there was a need for it, gave me an opportunity. I can't tell you how many times Craig had me up talking to the groups that he had come in, invited me to many of the functions. People didn't even know there was an Office of Law Enforcement Coordination. So what we did is my hardest challenge at the beginning, to be honest with you, Bill, was to convince the SAC. I was not there to get between them and the relationships. I was there to get there to enhance the relationships. I could go right to the director. I was on the 7th floor, about 4 offices down from the director. He passed my office every morning. I traveled around the world with him, and he always asked, "How's it going, Louis?" That was his favorite line. "How's it going?" And I would tell him, "Hey, and I'm hearing this," or we'd go to ICP, or we'd go up to do Craig's function every year. And I'd say, "Hey, you're going to hear this." So the issue was to convince those SACs, I'm here to help you in the relationships. I don't want to get between the relationships. And because I had been a police chief, I had been a member of all these associations. I was pretty well known in the law enforcement community, but I never got in front of those relationships. And I think that was what the main part of our success for the office. And they knew I had access to the director. They always saw me with the director. And his favorite line, a lot of times, if somebody would mention something at a conference, he'd say, "Talk to Louis. He's my guy." So they knew I was the guy that was going to make it happen.
And for
Well,
those who
Louis,
might not be familiar with the term SAC, that's critical to understand what that means. So why don't you explain what an SAC is?
This SAC is a special agent in charge. They run like the Dallas office, the Richmond office, the Washington field office. So those are the guys. They're like the director of that particular area. New York has an assistant director over that office. So I have to deal with them. Boy, if you come in there, you do something without their approval, they get a little rift. So
heads will roll.
yeah. And
Louis,
I needed those relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were the perfect guy for the job because of your background. I mean, you grew up 20 some years in Kansas City, a local department, rose to the rank of major. Then you moved to High Point, where you become a police chief, and then you go to the FBI. Now, I have to ask you this question because you've alluded to it. The FBI has had a reputation, probably forever, that they don't play well with state and local law enforcement. One of I think, the myths, at least, and you can correct me if it's wrong, is that the FBI tends to come into a big crime and take over and get all the glory and all the credit because that's the way J. Edgar Hoover liked to do it in the old days. And to some extent, that narrative has remained true. When you got there, I mean, how did you feel about it? Did you feel that the FBI really was negligent in working well with state and local law enforcement, or was that more of a myth?
I grew up with that. I grew up with that mindset. When I was in Kansas City, I was never really involved with the FBI that much. I was more of a field operational kind of guy. I wasn't on many of the big task forces. So that wasn't kind of my thing. But when I became police chief and we started, introducing the High Point Initiative, Chris Swecker, who was my SAC out of Charlotte, and I became very close. As a matter of fact, he was very instrumental in me end up getting the job with the Bureau because of our relationship. But I mean, it was after I got into the FBI, I realized, there's always two sides of that story. And, but I think what helped me, Craig, more than anything, is that the director had been a local prosecutor in DC, and he had worked homicide cases with local detectives. And obviously, the DC area better than probably anybody on this broadcast. So, I mean, that U.S. attorney, so there was a lot of context. So he knew. There was a lot of guys saying, "Oh, director, you don't need to bring a guy in from the outside. We have these great relationships." But he had sat down with the local cops out in San Francisco. He had done it in DC. So he knew they weren't perfect. I don't think they were as bad as people were making them out to be. A lot of it was just kind of redefining those lanes and emphasizing the importance that state and local was going to play in the future of the FBI success in preventing another terrorist attack. And if you remember when Director Mueller come out with his 10 priorities when he became the director, I believe number 8, and they weren't in any particular, number 8 was contact with state and local, develop that communication, information sharing with state and local law enforcement. Because in reality, it was state and locals who had all the information. They had all the intel. They had all the resources or the assets, if you will. So it was just educating the Bureau, since they now took a turn from being more reactive agency to a prevention focus, because you got to prevent the next terrorist attack. Yeah. What they were used to was showing up to the bank after the robbery or to the community after the kid was kidnapped. Now you got planes flying into buildings that you got to prevent. And it was hard for them to change that mindset where state and locals, that's what they focus on. They focus on preventing bank robberies and kids being kidnapped and all those kinds of things. So,
and I think you have to realize that if that was their goal right after 9/11 to prevent future terrorist attacks, I think they've done a pretty good job of accomplishing that goal. Obviously, we've changed a lot in this country in terms of security measures and law enforcement, et cetera, and it seems to have worked. I'm interested, though. You've been removed from the FBI for quite a while now, but the FBI lately, the last year or two, has been under a lot of criticism, and in some cases, charges have been made by Trump and others that they were partisan in the way they were practicing, and perhaps even weaponizing the FBI to be involved in some sort of political witch hunts and such. What's your view from you're an outsider now, but I mean, you were there. I mean, do you feel the FBI has ever been political? I mean, how are they doing their job today in your estimation?
Yeah, I can only speak to the time that I was there and what I saw when I was with Director Mueller, who, I mean, we would stay at a local field office if we were at like the National Sheriff's Association and there was a, senator that was speaking on stage. We would stay at the local field office until that senator did his thing or she did her, and then when they left, then we would show up. That's how conscious the director was about even being on the stage with political people. So and then on your thing, I remember a great story. Here's a great story for you, Clay. I never shared this with you. You got invited us to come to the candlelight vigil, and there's obviously a lot of politicians on there. Now we were driving in town, and the director called me and actually said, "Louis, should I really go to this thing?" And I said, "Director, you got to go to it. You've got Ashcroft was going to be there, and you had the DEA. I mean, he was that conscious about being on the stage with people." And I said, it's not going to be any of that. It's going to be, a very, very good thing for you. And he ended up showing up and he came down. I think everyone that, while I was with him, while I was there, we showed up. So yeah, I never seen that part of it. I really have. I never was ever in a meeting or anything where I thought, boy, this is a Republican Democrat thing. I never saw any of that. Now, I think what you had a lot of young people that got promoted before they should get promoted. You saw them on TV. I mean, you saw them in the Senate hearing committees or hearings. So without pointing out any of those people, probably should have never had the positions that they had. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Well, and just think back to the Obama administration, and I think that's where a lot of things started happening where, the FBI was utilized as a political tool and they started spying on the Trump campaign and tapping their phones and all that kind of stuff. I think that became the beginning of a lot of that politicalization. And it kind of goes back into this whole thing that we were talking about in Kansas City, St. Louis, and Missouri is, you're trying to get that politics out of law enforcement. And it's difficult because the FBI is federal, right? So they're working under the DOJ, and the FBI director and the director of the DOJ are appointed by the president of the United States. And oftentimes those people are political pawns sometimes, or certainly whatever the political affiliation is of the president oftentimes becomes the political affiliation of the director of that, of his cabinet, right? So it kind of seems like we're going to bring it back into St. Louis and Kansas City again, because I find it kind of interesting that this is only going on in one state in this country. And why do you think that hasn't become more popular or spread across the country, I almost think like, everybody wants to have their own kingdom or their own fiefdom where they can control local government and local police. And in Missouri's case, that's very different.
No, and I don't think it's solution or it's an option for everybody. I don't think it's something that everybody should embrace. You got, like I said, you got big cities like Kansas City and St. Louis, but if you look at Baltimore, you look at Cleveland, you look at Seattle, and you get those major cities, and if the focus isn't on public safety, keeping those communities safe, Philadelphia, you know, I mean, Chicago. Don't get me started on Chicago. I sit here back. I think what's happened in Chicago over the last 20 years has been probably the biggest civil rights violation in our history, where every weekend, well, virtually every day, but every weekend, let's say, where people are going to get shot. You know what they're going to get shot with. It's in a 3-mile area, and we're not doing a thing about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
crazy.
I sit back and say, this is just crazy. And you talk about intelligence-driven policing. If I can tell you between these hours on this date, it's going to be a handgun. I can tell you the victim, the race of the victim. I can almost tell you the race of the suspect. Yep. And you're saying you can't do anything about it? 4th of July weekend, almost 50 shootings, nine deaths, I believe, something like that. Just crazy. And the July 2nd, I understand they killed 4 other people. And you're saying that can't be prevented. That should be the easiest crime to solve in Chicago, but it's not.
Well, Chicago has turned into a complete and total shit show. I mean, and the last 2 mayors that they've had have been absolute buffoons, and they definitely do not support their police. And they've brought in police superintendents there in Chicago that align with the mayor's politics, and they're yes sir men. They go along with that, and that's become a real problem. And I think that's what's again. I want to go back to the Missouri thing. I think that's why it's so much more interesting, because your cops aren't going to go out there and put their ass on the line and be proactive and get down and dirty in those areas and take care of crime if they don't feel like they've got the administration's got their back and they're
Yeah.
supported. And when you've got these liberal politicians that are bringing in these police chiefs that can be fired on a whim, if you're not going along with what they feel, if the police superintendent in Chicago put together a task force and sent them down to the southwest side of Chicago and just started taking care of business, the chief would probably be, the superintendent, he'd probably be fired by the mayor, right? So it's kind of crazy, and that's why I had asked again about how come that just hasn't taken off around the country.
It's about power. It's about power. It's about leverage. That's what it's really all about. When you have the power you look what's going on in LA. Now we probably all know Jimmy McDonald, great guy. I think solid of the earth guy, and I felt bad for him when I saw him standing on TV, because let me tell you, Jimmy McDonald knows what to do.
Of course, they know what to do.
He knows exactly what to do.
They just can't do it. They just can't do it. Right.
Because you got Karen Bass, who's got 1 day of law enforcement experience ever. And all of a sudden, she's the expert on what needs to be done to keep the city safe. Now, I can guarantee you, she's not dictating the same way to Jimmy or to the guy who runs the electrical department, saying, I don't want you to do, whatever the lingo is. No, she doesn't do that. But for some reason, these people get into office and they think all of a sudden they're experts in public safety, when in fact you got a chief that's been there for 25 years, got 30 years of experience, or whatever it is, and you don't really know what you're doing.
And they're just political pawns then. They're turned into yes sir men because they're more concerned about keeping their job than doing the right thing or supporting their cops. And that's very, very disheartening and frustrating. And that's why you have the morale problems, because the cops just know they're not getting the backing. And we were at a cigar bar one time, and Craig said to me, I don't understand why you never became a police chief. And I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "Can you see me listening to some mayor or city council telling me how to do police work, just like what you just said, Louis? Like Karen Bass, she's done like 5 minutes of law enforcement in her life, and she's basically dumber than a doorknob anyway. And then you got to answer to that woman after you've done a career in law enforcement. And I used the analogy with Craig, and I said, Craig, it's like you getting on an airplane. You've never flown an airplane in your life. You don't know anything about airplanes. And you stick your head in the cockpit and you want to tell the pilot how to fly the plane, and you've got these mayors and council people and whatnot that want to tell career law enforcement people how to do the job. And it's crazy to me.
And if you look at law enforcement, it's probably one of the most regulated, watched. There's more federal, state, local rules about law enforcement, public safety. I don't know a profession that probably, maybe medical profession, maybe a doctor, but you think about it, you're pretty much, watch pretty close every day in what you do. And so this thing, well, you go out there, it's just crazy. And I think, but I'm optimistic. I really am. I think I do see some light at the end of the tunnel. I hear good police work going on. I talk to cops all the time. But I want to go back to something you said, and I don't think you know it until you are a police chief, because I know personally for me, and when I talk to cops and former chiefs, you get in there and the city manager, rubs you the wrong way, or you think, hey, this isn't going to work. I can just leave. But you've developed relationships with your people. You feel responsible for them. If I walk out the door, it's good for me, but I leave them behind. And now they've got to deal with, because city manager is going to put some knucklehead in there. And a lot of times you hang around, not because you're a political pawn, but because you care. You care about the citizens. That's why you got into the business. You care about these troops now that you've come and you're their leader. And no matter how long you've been there, you think, I just can't jump ship on him. It'd be easy to do, because most of these guys have already got jobs someplace else. If they're halfway smart, they realize, hey, I've started looking for a job after my first year there. So when I hear people say, well, they should, I sit back and say, hey, until you're in that seat and you think, boy, I can't leave these guys. I don't want to just leave them out there. I don't live by themselves. I'll stick it out. Maybe this will change, and it never does.
It's a wonderful trait. I mean, to you have the concern for your people, and isn't that what a leader is?
That's it.
So what? Yeah, other than elections, I guess what I hear you saying, Louis, is you better be careful who you elect, because that person at the local level who you elect is going to have a huge impact on how your community is policed.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, I think you should. I was talking to a golf buddy of mine yesterday. They were talking about the district attorney's election. I says, somebody better ask, hey, what's your on bail bond? What are your top priorities for prosecuting cases? There's only so many resources. You see what's going up in New York and L.A. and Chicago with Fox out there. And the lady that was in Gardner, I think her name was, in St. Louis. I mean, they weren't prosecuting anybody. Right. So I says, you need to know that, just like you should know who's on your school board. Well, who would have ever thought that you show up for a school board meeting? Now you go there to make sure that, hey, they're not teaching your kids crazy stuff. So, I mean,
we get very exercised about our national politics, obviously, and we should.
It's all local.
You know what? There's somebody said this, somebody way smarter than me. All politics is local.
Yeah.
Somebody,
yeah.
But isn't that the truth? And what you're just saying here about the politicization of policing is all about elections.
Yeah.
It's about elections. And
very much so.
Careful who you choose to run your city, because they're going to choose the city manager or who runs your city council or whatever. And sometimes we don't pay much attention to those elections.
Yeah. Or you get a case like you see up in New York where they want to get rid of the police department completely.
We keep saying the pendulum may be swinging in a more positive direction when it comes to policing and criminal justice today than, say, 2 or 3 years ago, in the heat of the defund the police movement. But we are only one election away, to Dennis's point, from returning back to the days of defund, defame the police, go easy on criminals. And I think, here at Citizens Behind the Badge, and you're a part of the team as a member of our Law Enforcement Advisory Council, I think we have to continue to beat that drum, because complacency can be a very dangerous thing. That when you think things are fine and you don't need to worry about it anymore, all of a sudden some evil head sticks up, and all of a sudden you're going backwards, not forwards. How do you feel about today? I mean, do you think we're in a better place than we were during the heat of the defund movement? Are we moving in the right direction? And are you concerned that we still have big problems to deal with?
Yeah, I think we're as much at risk now as we were during the George Floyd thing. I think it's been, kind of went underground. I believe it's more organized. I believe they're more educated. I think we've never. I don't think we'll ever stop hearing about defund the police. Anytime you have an incident, like I think we were talking before we went on about, the protests you see now and the violence against ICE officers, and mixed in with those ICE officers are local cops, the sheriff's deputies. And you get somebody that's going to get shot, and that'll eventually happen. I mean, they just keep escalating the violence. We were talking about, I believe it was the marijuana farm, where they now actually have guys shooting at the ICE officers. So the officers are going to end up, having to defend themselves. So when that happens, you'll have this whole defund the police piece again. Mm-hmm. But you said something a second ago, Craig, that concerns me just as much as all this other stuff. You talk about the pendulum, and I've been in this business long enough. What ends up happening is that we let stuff get so far out of hand that you'll have citizens come in and say, do whatever you have to do to make us safe. And that pendulum doesn't go halfway. You'll have agencies that'll do that. And you'll have people that will abuse their authority. You'll have officers that'll go out and do crazy stuff. And then what we do is then we'll find ourselves all the way back over here, because you will have officers who will do anything because the citizens just give up. And that's where I think you got to have that pendulum right in here. So there's always that. But when you get too far here, too far there, and I said, you never want to get to the point where the citizens say, it's so bad, just come in and do anything, do whatever you have to do to make it right. Because there will be police officers that'll do that, and it won't be good for our profession. And I think we've worked so hard to try to get back to gaining that trust, because a lot of people did drink the Kool-Aid about, how bad the police are. And, it just, and I think I actually got written down on a piece of paper in front of me, Citizens Behind the Badge, we're educators. We have to be educated. We have to educate people about what law enforcement is all about, public safety, but more importantly, what citizens' roles are in that process. It's just not the police. It's just not rolling up. What are the responsibilities? What's the involvement? What's the role of our citizens in the policing, criminal justice, public safety process? And I think that what we can do, these podcasts are great. I think we can get them out and just not top stories. It's, hey, you got to show up to the city council meetings. You got to go to your, every city or every city that I know of has some kind of public safety committee made up of 2 or 3 people from the city council. Have you ever been to that meeting to let them know that public safety is a concern of yours? And I think that, I don't think we're going to we're out of the woods yet. But I do think that I see some light at the end of the tunnel. I see officers out there that are doing a better job. They're more active. I think you see more support for law enforcement, because people have finally come to the realization that it's a very small group of people that are beating that drum about getting rid of the police, defunding the police. And since we have great organizations like Citizens Behind the Badge go and say, hey, wait a second, there's 2 sides of this story. I've done a kind of an informal survey on my own over the last several years. And I think I was telling you, I'll be at a cocktail party or a picnic. I'll just ask somebody, it says, I got a question. Have you personally ever been in contact with a police officer when you needed police service? You'd be surprised how many people have never called the police.
Never.
Just never. No, but I know somebody that had. My next door neighbor had their kid's bike was stolen. Well, have you ever seen a police officer? This one I always do. Have you ever seen a police officer with his hands on his gun? No, I've never seen. I said,
Yeah.
here's the big one. Have you ever seen a police officer point his gun at anybody? And to this day, probably if I've asked that question 1,000 times, maybe 2 people have said yes to any of those. And you think, well, then where are all these dead people that we're killing? They got to be laying around someplace.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting, though? Isn't that interesting, Louis? Because, we were just talking about that on our last podcast and about the statistics. And Craig was saying that, some 60 some odd million contacts per year with law enforcement, and how infrequent the use of forces are, the negative contacts.
Less than 2%. Yeah.
Yeah. Think about it. So when you have those conversations, because people ask me about behind the badge and what am I doing now? I'm always proud to say that I'm involved with this group. I just ask them those simple questions. When was the last time you saw a police officer pull his gun?
Yeah. Probably
Do you
never.
know anybody that's ever had their gun pointed at them?
Or
And they'll go on, and it's just not there.
even ask a police officer, when is the last time you pulled your gun?
Yeah.
I happen to be the father of a police officer, and she's been on for 16, 17 years. I think maybe once, twice in 17 years. So, and she works some pretty high risk things. But I wanted to interject here at this point, take a quick pause and remind everybody that this podcast is Heroes Behind the Badge. You're listening to one of the true heroes, and that is a gentleman who served local, state, and federal. He's got a better handle on policing than probably almost anyone, and his name is Louis Quijas, and he is here today talking about his life and his career. And this podcast is brought to you by Citizens Behind the Badge. Okay.
Yeah.
citizensbehindthebadge.org. Okay. That's where you can go to find out all about Louis on there. His picture's on there. Bill Erfurth is on there. He's one of our founding directors. I'm a founding director. Craig Floyd is the chairman of and CEO and president and head poobah. He is the man who created this idea.
Much responsibility.
Yeah. Many other things off camera. We won't mention them in this podcast.
We'll talk really what about Craig.
So I want to ask Louis. So Louis, all these years that you were in law enforcement, and as Dennis had just stated, state, local, state, and federal. What's the craziest story?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a good one, Bill. I've never been asked that.
Did you ever pull your gun?
Yeah. You know what? I probably, when you said that, I was through my mind back when I was a cop. If you got like a bank call, you had to have your shotgun out or you had your gun out. But I can't remember ever pointing my gun at somebody. I just don't remember. I'm a pretty good, yep, and try to talk people out of stuff because I didn't want to get hurt myself, but didn't want to hurt people. But there's some guys get in a situation that that calls for that kind of force. But getting back to your question, you know what? I probably the day I got the call from the director probably was when to talk about. I know I do. Let me tell you one of the highlights real quick. I got the director and I went to Kansas City for a briefing, and I'm in the Kelly the Clarence Kelly building. Many of you may not know that after Hoover passed away, Clarence Kelly became the FBI director. He happened to be my chief. He was the chief in Kansas City, and Nixon selected him because he had been a former FBI agent. Looked just like Clark Kent, the guy. Just when I remember seeing him, he swore me in, and but they named the building after him, the Kansas City office. And the director and I are sitting in the SAC, the Special Agent in Charge office, and we're sitting there, and I'm looking out the window, and there's a park called Monkey Park. It's in the Hispanic community there in Kansas City, and I played there when I was a kid. My uncle and I would walk up the street and play in that dirt parking lot. And now I'm sitting in this office with the director being briefed by the SAC on some shit, crazy stuff. And I'm looking out there and say, is this a great country or what? Is this a great country that a kid from Kansas City that played in that Dust Bowl right there that we call the baseball field, that one day would be sitting here with the FBI director, and I think that's where sometimes I get a little emotional because I think this is the greatest country in the world. There should not be the issues that we have crime wise. Everybody should be safe. Everybody should be fed. I hate to see hungry people. Uh, and who are the who makes sure that we all do the right thing? It's the cops. It's the cops. It's the police officers that get into this profession. I used to teach an executive leadership course, and I used to always say, you know what? Don't forget the why. Why did you become a cop? Why did you become? Remember when because every cop, all you guys that were in law enforcement, somewhere along the way, somebody asked you during the interview process, why do you want to be a police officer? And we said, I want to take care of people. I want to, get back to the community. Then why is it 6 months later you're beating people with a billy stick or you're stealing shit and blah blah? You forget the why. And
So
that's where leadership comes in. You got to remember what the why was. I graduated. I was working the midnight shift. Let me tell you, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my first day, I was already in my uniform. I couldn't wait to get to the police station. Wouldn't it be great if you felt that way every day?
is
Years later.
isn't that isn't that the truth, Louis? Because when we all first started, and I remembered, man, this is
That
like,
question, didn't you?
well, the thing of it is, you first started the job and you were so gung ho and you were so into it, right? And you thought, wow, this is like having front row seats to the biggest freak show in America. You would see the craziest shit that nobody would ever see, right? And I remember as a young cop, I was like, man, I'd almost do this job for free. This is like totally unbelievable, the things that you would see. And I remember for a number of years, I had more fun when I was at work than on my days off, and I didn't even want to have my days off. I wanted to work every day, and I remember some of the old timers back then too, and they were all so cynical, and they had just seen so much over their careers that they had just become very, very cynical and calloused. And I thought to myself, you know what? That's never going to be me. And then all of a sudden one day, that was me.
Yeah.
And the job kind of ate you up a little bit. I want to do one quick side note over to Dennis here. I'm going to ask Dennis a question because we were bantering this about how many times people have pulled their guns. Dennis, how many times were you with me riding along and you saw me pull my gun?
Let's see. Per shift, I'd say an average eight to 10.
Per shift.
Can I say, going back to that, I think we had, and Dennis, you were talking a little bit earlier about leadership.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so important. I see great leaders out here. We do have great leaders in law enforcement. I'm a little disappointed that we haven't heard more from our leadership. We have a lot of guys out there, a lot of associations. I've not heard anything from these groups when they're talking about defund the police and you see officers getting hurt. And, I'm thinking, where are these leaders? But going back to what we were talking about, I think the responsibility is, as a great leader, to create an environment where every day when that cop, if it's his first day or if it's the day, I remember the day I retired, I put my uniform on and I was almost as excited that day as I was the day I started going to the midnight shift at Central Patrol Division and on Admiral Street. So nobody does it better than us. I'm going to say this, and I want to throw some credit to Craig. It's one of the few times I get a chance to do it on this scale. All you got to do is just go to the National Memorial. You go to the candlelight vigil. I remember Craig gave me an honor that I never forgot. He let me reach, I think it was 4 or 5 names, Craig. And I remember studying those names and pronouncing those names because I thought if I get up there and that family is it Martinez or Martinez or whatever, I get up there and I say that name, I want to just say it as clear and as loud. So I drive home the fact that we never forget. And when people talk about, well, Louis, why would you stick around so long in this profession? You could have made, because I did. I was fortunate. I went out to the private sector and I made some good money. There's nothing wrong with making money. Let me tell you that. I tell myself I'd go out and do it again. I know that sounds crazy for a 74-year-old guy, but I would go out and do it again.
Mhm.
And if the profession, if you can do something that makes you a 74-year-old guy say, "Shit," if somebody called me today and said, "Hey, Louis, could you go down and just do one shift?" I think
Come on,
I could do it.
let's do it. I'll talk Sheriff Mina here in Orange County.
But I think every police officer should go to the National Memorial
I
and
totally agree.
just stand there and look at those names thinking, hey, because you got a tendency to think that all this crap started when you showed up at the police headquarters, and well, when I leave, they're going to make a toenail shop out of it. That's not how it works. You have a new generation that comes in. But when you create the memorial, you can go there. I don't know how many professions, you can go to and look there and say, wow, I'm part of this.
And what's
And
really
it was all
important,
worth the effort, the blood, sweat, and tears. And this is why I did it. Well, I tell you, that's pretty emotional.
and what's really important, Louis, is to go during police week.
Yeah.
I remember my first time, Bill Erfurth took me there, and I met Craig at that point, and obviously the rest is history. But I could not believe what I saw. I don't know, what is it, 40, 50,000 cops from all over the world, actually,
Yeah.
gather there with the families to honor fallen officers. That is, it's if you've never seen it, and every I've taken my daughter numerous times. Every police officer needs to do that,
Yeah.
because that will
Whenever-
reinforce the reason, the why you became a cop.
Yeah. And I think it reinforces that we never forget.
Yes.
No, it's easy to say that. It's easy to, oh, yeah, we
Yeah.
never forget. We don't forget. I could take you a place where it shows you we don't forget.
Never.
Yeah, we never
I've always
forget.
said too.
And thanks to Craig and his efforts, said,
Absolutely.
we were there.
But Bill has always said that it helped him in his career when he came to Police Week, and he was reminded of why he became a cop and really met all the good people there. But I always say to people that, to your point, that every officer should come to National Police Week at least once, and realize when you look at that memorial, you're following in the footsteps
Very
of
much so.
some of the greatest people that have ever walked the face of this earth.
Yeah.
And then now, because the National Law Enforcement Museum was built in 2018, you can look at the names, remember the sacrifice, honor them, but then go across the street and see the full story, the complete story of American law enforcement.
Yeah.
And realize that this profession is so important to this nation.
Yeah.
It's the reason why we have the freedoms that we do and can live the kind of wonderful lives that all of us have been blessed with. And
Yeah.
if not for law enforcement, that wouldn't be possible. So hopefully every officer will come, but I also want individual private citizens to come because they need to be reminded of the service and sacrifice that law enforcement gives to this country each and every day. It's not easy, as you pointed out. And today, over the last 5 years, it's been really difficult with the defund and defame the police movement. We do seem to be moving in a better direction now. I hope it lasts.
Agree.
I like your point about keep the pendulum in the middle. Don't swing left, don't swing right. Keep it
Good
right in
analogy.
the middle.
Mm.
Everything will go a lot easier. And
Yeah.
Louis, I'm so proud and thankful that you've been a part of this podcast today, but more importantly, that you were such an important part of the law enforcement profession for 36 years. Thank you, my friend. It's an honor.
All right, no, it's all my honor, and to be on this podcast. I think I was telling the gentleman while you were taking a break earlier. I've done a lot of stuff. This made me nervous today. I don't know why.
Oh, come on. After all you've been through, sitting on the throne of power up there in DC, this is
I had my wife load up my grandkids. I said, I don't want any distractions. I got more lights behind you. If you saw what's behind this screen here, you'd say, Larry. No, I really appreciate you giving me
thank you, Louis,
opportunity
telling
of
your
this.
story. We pride ourselves in getting people like you to come here and tell their stories, because your story is an inspiration.
Oh.
Your story should be an inspiration, and your words are inspirational. Your
thank you.
optimism, your optimism. I mean, not everybody has your optimism.
Mm.
Yeah, I still think it's the greatest country in the world, the greatest profession in the world. And when you have an opportunity to interact and be a part of organization like Citizens Behind the Badge, and interact with great professional people like yourself, you know, today I know why I stay connected. And it'd be easy for me to retire and just do crazy stuff. But thanks to Craig and you guys, I still been able to contribute, and that makes me feel very, very good. So thank you very much for having me today.
We're glad you're connected. We were glad to have you as a guest. That'll conclude this episode of Heroes Behind the Badge. Please go to our website at Citizens Behind the Badge. And citizensbehindthebadge.org. I forgot the org. The org is important. You can find out all about Citizens Behind the Badge. You can find out how to get involved in support of the men and women of law enforcement. And you can find out how to hear the next episode of the Heroes Behind the Badge podcast. We hope you'll select like, subscribe, all those cool things. You got to hit the buttons, and that tells us and tells the algorithm that you like what you heard. If you like what Louis had to say today, hit subscribe, hit like. Okay? We'll see you next time.